Farmers, trust is everything. At Genesis Fertilizers, we're not just proposing to build a facility, we're building a future designed for you. With real progress already underway, we're closer to providing Western Canadian farmers with a reliable, locally produced fertilizer supply. Now is the time to take control of your farm's future. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. And welcome to RealAg Radio, the bonus edition, everybody, here on this Friday. We couldn't stay away. So Friday's RealAg Radio show that was broadcast on Sirius XM on Rural Radio 147 was from the Canadian Outstanding Young Farmers meeting in Lethbridge, Alberta. But a lot has happened this week, and you know what? I'm getting ahead of the popular demand. I'm getting ahead of it. I know there's going to be popular demand. Where is the RealAg Radio Issues panel? Well, it's right here. Bonus edition for you here on this. I guess we are Black Friday today, aren't we? It is like, why aren't you guys out shopping?
I'm doing it as we speak online.
Oh, that's during the panel?
During the panel.
Well, if you do have any feedback on today's episode, you can send us an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Of course, you can find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms, or why not call the RealAg feedback line? The number is 855-776-6147. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals since 2010. Like, they've been in this game for a long time. They've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca. Let's talk to our RealAg Issues panel. You know them all well. They got great perspectives, and a lot has happened this week, as I said. Indeed. Up first, Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Hey, Kelvin, how's it going?
Doing well here, Shaun, and I would be shopping, but I'm curious, Lyndsey, how are you expecting to get your parcels that you are ordering online with Canada Post?
Mm-hmm. Pigeons. Yeah,
pigeons.
There's like carrier pigeons. Carrier pigeons are the new thing, so we're bringing them back. They're going to do things. Yeah. Anyway, we can talk about the Canada Post.
There was actually a report of, I believe, a prison in British Columbia where they were using pigeons to carry illicit
contraband.
Material.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Recently.
Okay. The RealAg studios are actually in the Canada Post building here in Lethbridge. So I've had a great vantage view of out my window of the picketers.
Our 12-year-old ordered a volleyball online a couple of weeks ago. And so she's learning a lot about strikes and the labor movement and Dad's opinions on them. She asks every day whether the strike is over.
They are delivering Santa's letters, though. I saw that in the news.
Oh, okay. Good. But I know I have family who have sent things that's already stuck in the mail. So I'm using this as hey, I'm just going to wait it out and then probably have to pay through the nose for UPS or something.
I never send out Christmas cards. And this year it's like, I was going to. It was, shoot.
But they weren't.
Had full intentions of doing so.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard her voice. You know her well. Hosts the show almost more frequently than I do at this point. Lyndsey Smith, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I will say we are lucky. Ontario, most of Ontario is getting smacked with like 20, 30 centimeters of snow. I am not, at least of right now. So I'm considering myself lucky because I'm not ready for that yet. Yeah. Oh, they're getting like pummeled.
We're winter wonderland around here. Mm-hmm. It's winter. Old man winter. It is not great. Also joining us is Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI. Tyler, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Shaun, and I thought everybody was going to wait till the 14th of December to start their Christmas shopping because that's when our GST holiday kicks in that the government passed this week. So shame on you, everyone shopping now and not waiting to get that 5% savings at the end of the day.
You're right.
That's the reason we're waiting, right, Tyler?
That's right.
Is that the tax trick?
December 24th.
The tax trick that Polyev has labeled it? Is that what we're talking about?
That's right.
Is that what it is? Okay.
It turns out the Conservatives want to axe the tax, just not the taxes that the Liberals are axing.
Right. They want to axe other tax.
Wrong
Other
ones.
tax.
which now we're like Dr. Seuss. So I'll start writing that one.
That
The axe the tax.
That is
Effective.
Canadian politics today, Lyndsey. It's all Dr.
Yeah.
Seuss.
Can we pause on this for just a second and actually just mention this, that like this is the first thing that has passed since late September in the House?
That's
Like
right.
I don't know if the average person recognizes, like literally nothing has moved forward since end of September because of the privilege motion and all the hullabaloo and all that. Nothing. Go ahead.
In the
I don't
House,
think anybody noticed.
Yeah,
the
just
Senate.
The Senate's been busy. The House is
Senate's been
doing
busy.
nothing.
But
Yeah.
again, a quick rundown for everyone, right? So the Conservatives are trying to get the Liberals to release documents involved in a scandal with a green fund that did some things that they should not have done. The Liberals are refusing to put the documents out, and the Conservatives are refusing to let them off the hook. And they've got the support of the opposition party, so I think eventually the Liberals are going to have to cave. This isn't sustainable, and Parliament's the boss, so Parliament should get the documents Parliament wants.
Do they have to cave? Like, do they just ride this out to the election?
Potentially they could, or
They
they could
could.
prorogue. Prorogue would blow it up. But yeah, they could ride it out for a while. I mean, they've written it out since September, so this has dragged on a heck of a lot longer than a lot of people thought it would.
Yeah.
There are big bills, though, that would be lost if they do that. For example, one that we've talked a lot about here in agriculture, the capital gains changes that were implemented last summer by the Canada Revenue Agency. They took effect in June, but the legislation behind it hasn't actually been passed yet. So that's one that's stuck in the House of Commons right now. We also have the fall economic update, which often is kind of a mini budget. The government certainly would use that opportunity, or could use that opportunity, in terms of setting itself up for the next election, and they're missing that window right now too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the big news stories of the week was the shot across the bow when it comes to tariffs. Actually, Tyler and I were sitting together in Ottawa. We were having a nice, calm, cold pint of beer, reflecting on the day that we had together at a round table event to do with ag tech innovation and the ecosystem of ag tech funding in Canada. Felt like we had maybe solved a few problems. It was a great day. And Tyler shows me his phone, and incoming President Trump threatens to put 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico if they don't meet some of his demands relative to drugs going across the border, as well as illegal immigrants. So that's what Canada has been in a flurry all week about. I guess as we reflect on this, Kelvin, what do you see this as more bark, or is there some real bite here that Canada needs to be aware of?
I'm going to give the same answer, I guess, that former BC Premier Christy Clark gave on the show earlier in the week. I think there's both. And that's something that the Canadian lawmakers, negotiators need to find out right now, is what is President Trump seeking here to view it as a win for him and the U.S. on this issue? What does Canada need to do? Is it invest more money in RCMP and Canada Border Services resources along the border? Is that enough of a signal? Or is this actually about what Robert Lighthizer would like to see, where it's about structural changes to the trade balance and to reducing the U.S. trade deficit? Because that's a much longer term issue that will have a lot more pain for people on both sides of the border if it's actually what Robert Lighthizer has talked about for decades in terms of his views on trade. And so that's where I think the Canadian and Mexican governments right now need to figure out what does it take to make this into what appears to be a win for President-elect Trump.
It was interesting. I remember going back a couple weeks ago, we had John Newton from Terrain on, and he said, you can get rid of the U.S. ag trade deficit really easily. Stop eating avocados and drinking wine. That's kind of the easiest way to close. You forget about tariffs. Just stop consuming those goods in such abundance. Tyler, what's your reaction to this week's news? What do you think?
So one important to highlight that this came 2 days before Cappy and RealAg Radio hosted a really great webinar on potential impact of Canada-U.S. relations, and so really set the stage there. Again, I think it's a lot more serious than people make it out to be. I think that there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is just Trump a negotiating tactic, and this will all just play out, and you've got to go through the motions." And there's probably some of that, but I'm not sure it's all just that. And I think that we've seen already the Trump react very positively to messages from the Mexicans about efforts that they're going to make. We haven't seen that same positive reaction and response to what's come out of the Canadian government. Again, I think even then we've seen a shift over the week where, the reaction on Monday was effectively, look at, we're different. There's a lot more people and drugs coming across the Mexican border. Don't treat us the same. And then it's taken a couple of days, but we are now hearing them more clearly talk about, we are going to invest more resources. We are going to put, drones and more people at the border. And so it sounds like they are coming around in Ottawa to the fact that, hey, we're going to have to do something different here.
But, maybe it is really about Mexico.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not. So if I could, everybody, let's remind everyone that facts don't really matter to Trump. What matters is his own facts, right? So he's got to win. He's got to feel like he gets a negotiation where, he comes out on top. So even though, the issue of, let's say, fentanyl, especially, that was named going into the U.S. from Canada is very small compared to Mexico, even though perhaps from the illegal immigrant crossing is very small compared to Mexico, that doesn't really matter. What matters is the perception.
But Lyndsey, I think that you're wrong, right? Because I think that the facts, we in Canada like to say that the facts are on our side. What the facts are is that there's been a significant growth in the exports of illegal drugs from Canada to the United States. And part of the reason why there's not more of it is because they're coming up through Mexico instead. So if they fix the Mexico border problem, all it's going to do is make the Canadian border problem worse. So we can talk about how the facts say we're not that bad. But again, the facts are we have an issue at the border where it's more porous than we would like to admit that it is. We have an issue on defense spending where we're not spending enough. We have an issue on a lot of these kind of competitiveness issues where we're not fully aligned with where the Americans are. So I think that we need to do a better job, like acknowledging that Trump may have some facts on his side in ways that are uncomfortable for Canadians.
So the second part to my point is Canada's been, I think, incredibly arrogant to think that that difference in, the amount is really going to matter. It's not. And so, I get that Canada, at least by the end of this week, has sort of seemed to be mobilizing, getting the premiers involved, these sorts of things. But I feel like first of all, this shouldn't be a surprise. Second of all, I feel like our response, and I think in the webinar, Megan Murdoch said it very well, that we should, not react, but respond. And I don't know that we have really done a great job of responding because I think we are too slow to sort of catch up here and start actually taking this seriously. I think that Canada, generally speaking, is sort of resting on this whole our neighbor and our friend and, hey, we're not that bad. No, we have to, this is an active negotiation, whether he's in office yet or not. So start negotiating.
Yeah, well, but that's also Canada's strategy on mostly everything. It's the relationship. We're relationship sellers, right? Yeah. Where I think that Trump's tactic here is the American way of doing business on steroids. It's the most hyperbolic version of that. And that's uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of Canadians. Ooh, that's abrupt. No, I think that's just them talking. I think the fact he gave us 2 months is really like a little bit more friendly than maybe it's being interpreted, because it gives opportunity. This isn't like, being launched and said on January 20th, the day of the inauguration. I think it gives Canada some time. And I what I see a little bit too is people running around like chickens with their head cut off a little bit too, in terms of like, oh no, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I think the Canadian government has a little bit changed their tact here. They're saying things in 2024 that they weren't saying in 2018. It's I don't know. What would, if we say respond, Lyndsey? How should Canada respond?
So, well, okay, first of all, that's above my pay grade. So if anybody wants to add me to their team, I guess then we'll have that conversation. But I think, like, to the point of like, why did it take this long to sort of actually start mobilizing and taking this seriously and putting together a response? I think that, communications 101, and we talk about this when we talk about the rural-urban divide or people not trusting food. First, you find your common ground. So the first thing out of the gate should have been, this is absolutely an issue. We are doing everything to address it. And then in the background, you figure out how you're actually addressing it. Like, you acknowledge that there's a problem, and then you go from there. You don't first exactly that, be like, oh, but we're buddies, we're not as bad as Mexico, whatever. Because yes, the fact is, sure, it's not as big of an issue, but it's still an issue. And it's an issue that, we should in some ways be kind of glad, you're exactly right, we've got a bit of a heads up here on this, and that, Trump didn't pick something else that is perhaps a much larger, issue to deal with. I'm not saying these aren't issues. They are, and they're large, but in comparison on the trade side, there could have been much more difficult things to address.
That's a fantastic point. I think that is great, because we can, take credit, because we realistically, much easier for Canada to solve these two identified problems. My concern is you solve them, and then we just move on to the next problem that we're constantly chasing our tail, trying to find the solution that does the appeasing. And Kelvin, you mentioned structural change. My largest concern, and I've said this before on the show, is how integrated supply chains are being viewed with the ultimate negativity. We heard President Trump say later in the week, midweek, there will be no exemptions on my tariffs for oil from outside this country. Well, that includes Canadian oil. So that's a structural change that they're talking about if he follows through on it.
That's getting back to what I'm saying about, is this actually about people and drugs crossing the border, or is this being used as an excuse? Because there are no clear goalposts here in terms of what Canada needs to do or what the target is that Trump and his team are expecting Canada and Mexico to meet. If this is about structural change and bringing back domestic manufacturing jobs to the U.S., there's going to be a ton of pain on both sides of the border for our exporting industries here in Canada as well as in the U.S. If, like you said, Shaun, in the oil example, what happens to gas prices across the Midwest the day those tariffs take effect or are confirmed? That is something that every person buying gas at the gas station, especially in the Midwest, is going to notice on right away, and so that pain is going to be felt. And if this is about structural change, then this will drag out and be an issue in the medium to long term, not just the short term. Yeah. And I've been listening to Robert Lighthizer book again lately. He values a domestic manufacturing job over almost any other economic metric. And so if that means raising the cost of living for all Americans, so be it. It's all about domestic manufacturing jobs. And we've just seen his protege, Jameson Greer, appointed as U.S. Trade Representative, nominated for U.S. Trade Representative this week. So I think that policy continues to be very influential in terms of Trump's inner circle. Well, we do, Tyler mentioned the webinar. We do have, the opening of the webinar was myself and ProFarmers Jim Wiesmeyer, good friend of the show here. We opened for 20 minutes talking about everything from the U.S. perspective. That's also going to be posted on the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. Cappy's posted it on their YouTube channel, and we'll have it at realagriculture.com. You should check that out. Tyler, I had a conversation midweek with a Canadian manufacturer, user of steel. They have facilities on both sides of the border, Canada and the U.S. And the CEO told me, you know what? We had an executive meeting the day after the threats. We're already talking about moving all of our production south of the border.
Yeah, it is hard to overstate rather the potential impact that this could have, right? That is, and again, I think to Kelvin's point, and we heard this a bit from Jim and some of the others on the webinar discussion, but like there was a change in thinking inside the United States where you can kind of slough this off as this is Trump being a negotiator, tactic, or you can acknowledge that if you look at that American First movement, if you look at what Bob Lighthizer's been saying for 30 years, they want tariffs in place. They think that they need tariffs in place to level the playing field. And you can get into a big discussion about how level or it's not in Canada, but they want that level playing field. And it doesn't, a 25% tariff has a significant chilling impact, but really like any sizable tariff at all will devastate Canadian exporters. And I think that we don't appreciate how much we do export to the United States. Our trade stats show that we're actually more concentrated in the U.S. from an ag and food export perspective. We actually have a trade surplus. We are an example of something that Trump wants to fix in Canadian agriculture and food, and the consequences could be pretty severe.
Well, and this idea that, hey, we need to diversify our trade portfolio. We need to do more business with Europe. Come on. That seems elusive at best.
And so much of the ability to process enough to drive that scale you need in a value-added processing facility in Canada is contingent on access to the United States market. You're going to lose that access to the United States market. The EU market's not going to be enough of it. And the reality is probably the company that was doing that business with the United States is either just bought or is going to invest in a facility south of the border, move all of the jobs and production south. It has the potential to be very messy.
Kelvin?
Which is exactly what Lighthizer wants, and the people from that school of thought want to have happen.
Right. Yeah. And hey, there's a lot of impacts. Like there's some reconciliation here in terms of live cattle going to plants in Utah and in Pasco, and those in Washington, those plants being reliant on Canadian cattle. You've got situations where, feed yards, Nebraska, Colorado, Texas, very dependent on feeder cattle coming out of Mexico. Like that's just one commodity that faces immense challenges. And I don't know if the explanation of integrated supply chain, like we've been talking about, is going to fall on, oh, good point. Yeah, we need these Mexican feeder cattle. The response is going to be, we need more feeder cattle here.
Then the big question is politically, how long can the Republicans survive if there's massive inflation? Like this is all these policies cause massive inflation in the U.S. And that's something that Trump's also very scared of.
True. But at the same time, the attitude is, this is just the attitude. I heard it from numerous people this week. We're just going to pay less for your Canadian product. So we're not eating the full 25% tariff. You are. And that's where we get into the semantics of the, I know, but this is where we get into the semantics of the definition.
That's not how it works.
Well, I'm just telling you the attitude.
But again,
it's the attitude.
But
more expensive manufacturer.
And part of their thinking is, right, so they're going to boost these tariffs up, potentially lower income tax. There's this talk about, again, could you replace income tax with tariffs?
You can't.
Not yet.
Yeah.
But setting aside the math for a moment, again, I think part of their argument is you're going to pay more on one side, but you're going to get this better deal on the other if we can pull some of these things off. I think we see this as a very kind of straightforward, narrow issue. Canadian potash is going to cost, corn growers in the Midwest more money. So why would they do it? But I don't think it's that straightforward at all. You've got to look at kind of this bigger political dynamic. And I think that they may be more willing to accept more pain than we think that they are.
Yeah. Well, and our dollar has tanked. So like right now,
oh boy,
right? The US dollar buys a lot of Canadian product. So like that factors in here too. And I think that it is far more complicated than, of course, anyone really wants it to be because of all these shifting, like the market will eventually adjust, but that probably means that there are unintended consequences, even though we can perhaps predict them. There are perhaps unintended consequences, and some of these may be very short term and some may be incredibly long term. And I understand the discussion, right, of like from Lighthizer perspective of, well, if we're buying in piglets from Manitoba, why don't we just build the sow barns here, and that's what we should be doing. Well, that's fine and all, but then, as Kelvin pointed out earlier this week when we talked about this, there are reasons that certain industries are in certain places because of competitive advantages. And by creating an artificial barrier, which is a tariff, you actually knock things out of balance as far as pure economics of competitive advantage. So what is the long tail? Tyler's like, just shut up, Lyndsey. You don't know what you're talking about. But what is the long tail of saying, okay, let's build all these hog barns in the States, and then 4 years later, Trump goes away, and are you going to be able to sustain them? Can you really artificially support them?
That's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons they want to legislate the tariff implementation.
Yeah.
But
it's market interference.
But this is where I think you're right. Like it does whack competitive advantage, or does kind of push competitive advantage out of whack. But that's a feature, not a bug of the approach in the American First Movement. They want to whack, to take competitive advantage and blow it up. Like that is the reason why that they're doing this. So they don't see that as a bad thing. They see that as a good thing, and they want to influence that competitive advantage to make it more competitive, to put the facility in the United States. Mm-hmm. And that is just like, I think that we need to think differently about this and understand that this isn't something that's just about, and this isn't, again, you talk about 4 years, things will go away. I'm not sure that this goes away in 4 years. Trump, the first time, shifted the thinking on protectionism. Biden didn't go back on any of it.
Exactly.
And it's hard to imagine that 4 years from now, when Trump and current crew aren't there, that they're going to go, even if it's a Democratic government, that they would peel back on this stuff. American First is a very tempting political message that's got broad appeal, got the president elected again, and we are bystanders.
Well,
collateral damage.
Well, I agree though, but this is the mistake that Canadians make. They focus on the Trump part of this, and they forget or don't realize this is both sides of the aisle. Now, how they get there is different, but the goal is the same. And I think that is a real, like, being in Ottawa on Monday and talking to a bunch of people about, future trade issues. That was before the tariff threat. We knew the tariff threat was eventually going to be coming, but I think people are a little bit the heads in the sand when it comes to what is actually happening in the U.S. and the rise of protectionist sentiment. And one of the things we're going to have to do is cross the precipice of the goal of convincing our friends to the South that the policies that they apply to protecting the country from Brazil and protecting the U.S. economy from China or India, that's not the same as Canada. And right now, I think it's a broad brush. But when I talk to people in DC, they'll say, "Oh, no, that's about China. It's not about, we need continental. Like we're like, don't worry." I don't know. I'm kind of worried about it.
Shaun, do they say that publicly, or do they just say that when they're talking one-on-one to you? Because
one-on-one.
Yeah, publicly, there's not a lot of, embrace of a continental approach at the end of the day.
Agreed.
And again, I think we get really caught up in tariffs. We often have forgotten to talk about things like, mandatory country of origin labeling is going to come back in a big way. We're not going to have the same tools to get rid of it this time as we did last time. You talk about a continental approach or lack thereof on renewable fuels policy. Like, there is a long list of issues that are going to get a lot tougher. And again, I think that there's a temptation in Canada to say, "Oh, we're not worried about it," and to not fully appreciate what's happening in Washington. And I think that is naive, and that will come back to bite some of our Canadian industries in the butt.
Don't worry. Go ahead, Kelvin.
I was going to say, our American agriculture still needs exports, and that's a major conflict here, or there's major dissonance in terms of we want to restrict all imports, not have to compete with imports from other areas of the world that have a competitive advantage, but we still want to sell to the rest of the world. Yeah, that I think is going to have to be dealt with internally, and that doesn't paint a rosy picture for the future of American agriculture either. If we're talking about only one-way trade.
They can get away with that a little bit more though than Canada can, because of the economic muscle. But yeah, your point is well taken, Kelvin. Lyndsey?
Well, and the other thing is certain things are far more portable than others. Like, let's face it, cow producers, a cow has to be about 2 or even a little more than that before she has a calf. That calf takes quite some time before it's ready to be, you can't just all of a sudden expand the cow herd in the States over a year, let's say, and all of a sudden replace all the cattle you're coming out of Canada. You can't. Now, cattle are movable, sure. You could sell them down to the States, whatever. But there are, and then potash. And Shaun, we've used this example, a few times. The geological blessing that is in Saskatchewan doesn't just magically appear somewhere else. So some of these industries are much more mobile and some are not at all. And so same thing with oil and gas. So there are, and this is, I think, the part that I hope doesn't have to be meted out in the actual market. I hope that there, through this negotiation, is that understanding that certain of these industries are integrated, or we want them to be integrated, because it does actually benefit America. And can we put it in that context in that way, and that we can be a partner? But we'll see where that goes.
Well, I promise you, the CEO of BHP, BHP is spending somewhere between 5 and who knows how many billion
Kajillion
on that new potash mine in Saskatchewan. I guarantee you they have made a phone call to somebody in the incoming administration to say, I don't think so. And we'll see how far that argument goes. Tyler?
But Shaun, I think that we fall into a bit of the same trap where we've spent most of our time talking about how much this is going to hurt the Americans. We spend so much of our time talking about the potential market impacts. We don't talk enough about, okay, but what's Canada actually going to do? And actually, how does Canada respond? What actions do we actually need to take to better position ourselves in the space? Because this is about getting to fair trade. This is about leveling the playing field. Again, there was a discussion highlighted, when we got through that first NAFTA renegotiation, we agreed to dairy tariffs and dairy tariff quotas, and we are not living up to the spirit and intent of that negotiation the first time around. So if we really want to talk about we are an honest broker, we are a meaningful partner, then we do need to be prepared to make some of these changes, because we're certainly not perfect on any of this stuff either.
Yeah, I've been telling people in speeches that I think that's exactly where Canada starts on the dairy file, is trying to meeting the U.S. definition of the TRQ allocations. Mm-hmm. But we will see.
It's all very Canadian of us to say when there's a tough spot in the tough patch in this relationship. Oh, the problem is us. I am the problem. It's very Canadian of us to self-reflect and be self-critical, I would say.
Kelvin, I've tried to say differently, and everyone tells me I'm wrong on this whole Trump thing. But I have to say, conversations I've had this week, I think, and Shaun tells me that this isn't a real saying, but it is, I think the penny dropped this week for a lot of producers in Canada, realizing that while they may like Trump as a person and they may actually respect what he wants to do and all those things, which I think that's your choice, how good this is for Canada and who the problem is. Like, I think people are starting to realize that while you may want a Trump-esque leader and you like the style or you like the whatever, this isn't going to be good for Canada. And I think people are realizing these things. But are we the problem? Realistically, Kelvin, we're 40 million people and we've got a couple things that the U.S. really needs, but we have a whole bunch of stuff that, frankly, we need them to buy. And so I'm not sure what we do. Tyler, what's the solution?
Well, but so I think the solution is first to understand that this isn't an either-or situation. It's not they're the problem or we're the problem. We're both the problem, right? Our problems are different. We do have a problem on defense spending, right? We do have a problem on immigration. When somebody comes into Canada, we don't know if they ever leave the country. Like, we have some pretty serious issues there with how we run our immigration system that does present a risk to the United States. Like, that is a legitimate concern that they could have. So it's not, just us or just them. It's both of us together. And I think if you look at what the federal government's worked on over the last 10 years and how those priorities played out, if you look at how they approached the last and after renegotiation, there are priorities that are not very well aligned, and we need to better understand, again, where we do have responsibility for things that we need to do at the end of the day.
Well, but a part of that is how there is a portion of Canada, and I would say even including this government at times, that looks down their nose. And we have this sort of like elitist look in terms of like, we're the sane ones. This country below us, our largest customer, they're the ones that are crazy. And that's an attitude for a lot of people. And I don't think the U.S. is the problem. I don't think Canada is there's issues. The real problem, and this is all taking away from the focus on it, the real problem is what's happening in things like BRICS or more specifically China and our defense against that. That's what the real problem is from a Western world perspective. Obviously, if in different parts of the world, you're going to think a little bit different about that, but that's the real problem. And all of this is really good political fodder, but a distraction from the real issue that needs to be tackled. And those blanket policies that they are using to tackle that issue, and I would say I mean the Americans, it's misapplied to this situation. We do need to be thinking more strategically, continentally, as more of an economic zone and a powerhouse than we currently are. And I do want to say we got no commercial breaks. This is really difficult. This is kind of fun doing a bonus episode. Hey, I want to tell you about Blackhawk EVO from New Farm. Blackhawk EVO is the next evolution in pre-seed burn down herbicides powered by Duplazin. Blackhawk EVO delivers fast, flexible, and complete control of early germinating and winter annual broadleaf weeds. Kelvin, I think I got the indication from you that you listened to the interview that we did with Christy Clark from Thursday show, right? Wednesday show. Sorry, Wednesday.
Wednesday show.
This week is a blur.
Yeah.
What was your takeaway?
She's well spoken. I think that I agree with her. Like I said earlier on the approach that Canada needs to take, and that this is both bluster and bite, I believe, is the term that was used in the interview. I can see why some people think she could be in the running as a Liberal leadership candidate, although I understand she doesn't speak French, which is probably a major limiting factor. But it's interesting that she is in the public realm. As soon as we talked about this interview happening at Agribition, and this conversation happening at Agribition in Regina this week, I was wondering, is this the beginning of a Christy Clark tour at a potential leadership run? And it sure seems like she is popping back into public conversation here.
Yeah, definitely comes across as like a Paul Martin liberal, or like a Paul Martin liberal. She would have to pull the Liberal Party much further to the center than they currently are. If you listen to her comments and thoughts about economic development and resource development and building dams, heaven forbid if oh my goodness, that it's kind of, if you're paying attention, that kind of catches you off guard if you compare it to some of the policies of the current Liberal government. Tyler, I'm not sure if you listened to it, but what's your thoughts on her perspective?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but I've heard her speak over the last year. Again, I think on the political piece, like, the reality is that the Liberal Party, if they do want to return to government one day, need to figure out how to get guys like Kelvin to think about voting for them in the future. And so obviously Christy Clark could be one way of Kelvin voting Liberal. We'll see how that works out for them long term. Again, I think that there's just this need for a more serious approach to these issues, right? And I think that Christy and kind of that more, what I would say, a more conventional approach at the end of the day to politics, more focused on traditional economic issues, is clearly something that there's an appetite for and there's a desire for. And going back to that comment earlier about how, don't react, respond, I think it is some more of that kind of thoughtful, grown-up approach that we need to get to at the end of the day.
And
it does.
At the same time, at a time when Quebec is, depending on who you ask, rapidly going towards another referendum on whether they stay or go as part of Canada, I don't know if a Western person who doesn't speak French is really going to do much on the federal side.
Yeah, again, I think people do need to really appreciate that our next government in Quebec is going to be a separatist government.
Yeah.
And that is a real threat. They're very clear. They've changed from the way that it used to be when, they kind of didn't want to talk about a referendum, and that was the way that the PQ would get back into power. Their new young charismatic leader likes talking about a referendum and likes talking about Quebec as an independent country, and so that's a different dynamic. But again, I think that those language and national issues are not Christy Clark's biggest issue. I think Christy Clark's biggest issue is that the Liberal Party doesn't have people like Kelvin in it anymore. That business Liberal has disappeared, and they now compete with the NDP.
Well, okay, so I love that we have just told Kelvin how he's voted in the past.
Well, I think Lyndsey, we all know, everybody knows kind of where the mainstream media, you lot of the mainstream media sit these days.
Poor Kelvin. The business, but I would agree though, and in conversations that I have as well, is that there are people that want to see more fiscal responsibility and actually at this point restraint from this party that they're not seeing. And I mean, ultimately, and this maybe comes full circle to how we started this entire episode, which was, on this idea that our government is not doing, like the House of Commons is not doing anything right now. This is pull the plug and start over. Like, this government is non-functional. It is dysfunctional. We know that even if this privilege motion moves on, there's another one. We're just in an absolute stalemate, and it's not serving Canada. So we've got really important issues that we need to be addressing as a country, and we need leadership on that. And that means we need a government with a mandate that can function. And so I don't care who you vote for, just get out there and do it. But we need an actual election so that we have a government that functions and moves forward.
Shaun, I think it's an interesting dynamic on your team where it seems like Lyndsey, the Easterner, is the conservative voice on the panel, and Kelvin from Manitoba is the Liberal voice on the panel. I don't know if you do that on purpose.
Pretty sure he's orange. Anyway, orange. No, just kidding.
But I think that, I mean, because this does come up in the discussion around our negotiating position with the United States, where Trudeau is got a weak position. Again, I say this as the nonpartisan guy on the panel, that we do need an election because we do need a prime minister with a mandate and we need a prime minister that can say to the premiers, having 13 voices negotiating with the United States is not helpful. And I know the premiers are all playing to their own domestic base, but I can tell you from my time in the federal government, like that is not helpful when you've got governments that are offside, kind of doing all of these different things, and you're trying to herd cats. And
do you blame them? Like, do you blame them? Do you think it sits politically? If you were the premier of Alberta, let's just use Danielle Smith as the example. Do you feel super comfortable when you look at the importance of oil and gas to the province of Alberta? Do you feel super comfortable that somehow the federal government's going to be negotiating and demanding and pushing for those exports to continue? Absolutely not.
And again, it's not just Smith, right? I think we all go to Smith as like she's on the other side and she doesn't like Trudeau, but it's Smith and Moe and Ford and Legault and Fury. They're all taking a different tack. But again, you need a prime minister that can say like no, Canada has one position. Canada negotiates the one approach. I can't see Pierre Poilievre taking very kindly to premiers across the country kind of off negotiating on their own. But you need a prime minister that can actually corral those cats back into the barn, or I'm not sure where that metaphor works, but that can actually do that. And today with the lack of a mandate that Trudeau has, it's just not possible.
To me, it goes to Lyndsey's point about we need a reset and a renewed mandate here, because you looked at the Liberal government the first time around heading into the NAFTA negotiations, they had that leverage to have a team approach. And right now, these premiers are all just stepping up, especially Doug Ford in a province as large as Ontario, with the economy the size of Ontario. They're stepping up to fill a vacuum here.
Ford's messaging has been pretty good. It's
he's good at this.
To me, Ford, we've talked about this before. He speaks the same language as the president-elect in many ways, and I think that they have the same style of politics, and I think that could lend. There could be some. I don't know, maybe again, focusing too much. Tyler always says we focus too much on personal relationships, but that type of personal interaction, I think, could be in Canada's favor.
But again, it's a good example where I think people like it when a premier is offside, when the premier is offside saying the things that we want the premier to say. But the fact that a premier is offside is not in a good position, right? Like it does create mixed messages. It does create this very weak negotiating position. And so if we're encouraging Doug Ford to be offside now, be prepared when the tables have turned and Poilievre's prime minister and we've got premiers being offside. And if it's good now, it should be good then. And I don't know.
Probably won't see that.
It's tough.
Yeah.
I don't know. I one of the things that I've said going back months is that one of the assumptions I do not believe to be true is that you have a conservative prime minister, they're going to get along with the conservative premiers. I don't see Danielle Smith and Pierre Poilievre having this rosy relationship because they're both inside the conservative tent.
And there will be losers as a fallout of this trade war with the United States, right? Like this will play the country off of each other, and there may be different outcomes for U.S. or for Alberta oil because it can't be moved to the United States, and there are for Ontario auto manufacturing jobs that can, and that's going to make it tough for the Prime Minister to negotiate that balance. And again, never mind Quebec separation. Like this is just not good for national unity across the country.
I would be more worried about for the auto sector because those plants could be relocated. At least in Alberta's situation, it's deposits, and in Saskatchewan's too when it comes to potash. Those are deposits, and so you can't move that manufacturing. You can do more drilling in the U.S., but it's hard to move the energy manufacturing. When it comes to auto plants, it's pretty easy for Ford and GM to say, "Been nice, Canada, sayonara," as they say. Kelvin, you want to say something?
For the company, not for the premier.
Right.
Although maybe they want him too. I don't know. Yeah.
Kelvin,
that goes back to the first part of this conversation about tariffs and whether these tariffs are about a short term, an issue that we can solve in the short term, or whether this is about long term and where businesses make those structural decisions of moving investments out of Canada.
We got to wrap up here. I got to go give a keynote speech over at Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers and talk about defining the under 40 farmer, which is an interesting exercise.
Also, I think that officially means we're old, Shaun. So there you go.
Yeah. I feel that way. We're in kind of meeting season and you're meeting the audience and you start to run into people and they're the same age as your kids. You're just sort of like, that happened fast, didn't it?
Yeah. Or you meet people and you're like, oh, I know your dad. Yeah. And
There's that
yeah,
too.
exactly. Yeah.
There's that. Yeah.
Anyway, good luck. Have fun.
Drew Spolstra.
We haven't talked
OFA.
about that.
Lyndsey, that's, he's an often a guest here on the show. So
yeah. Possibly the most smiley of the ag leaders we have.
I had lunch with him
always-
last week. Yeah, he's very smiley.
He is a smiley guy. Anyway, so I watched, Burn Tobin was there, of course, at the OFA AGM, took in, part of the day, but of course they also have a live stream. So I watched here from Ottawa when I could. So I think it was quite expected that Drew would step in, again, as president. I think he's, got a lot of work still ahead of him that the members want him to be working on. Our friend Ethan Wallace got moved up to VP. Sarah Wood, also a VP, and Paul Maurice is the executive member, is I think the name there. So congrats, of course, to that whole team and to Ethan, who's a good friend of ours. And so it was great to see him move up to VP. They've got they've got some big issues on their plate as well. And in watching the AGM, access to natural gas is still a big one. Preserving farmland still a big one. But this Ontario is a large market dependent on the U.S. as well. And so
I heard there's a province, I think it's called Alberta, that has tons of natural gas. I would love to
Never heard of them. Never heard of them.
Just,
Okay, cool.
I'm pretty sure there's a pretty ample supply.
Weird. Anyway.
If
only there was some way to put them across. No.
Yeah, like in a tube and ship it across the Canadian ship. That would be. Has anybody thought of that before?
Okay. The sarcasm bus has officially left the station.
I like these bonus episodes. I can really layer it on. I really like this. Tyler, blah, blah, blah. Tyler, you were at Prairie Cereal Summit in Banff. Wow.
What'd
you learn there?
So I learned that I think that we need organizations like Alberta Grains, that's the host of it, like the OFA that we just talked about, to be doing more. Like, there are a lot of issues out there that need to be solved. A lot of talk about R&D, a lot of talk about the future of variety development, a lot of talk about all of the risks that farmers are facing, presentations right on the kind of the yield drag that we're starting to see, where we're not meeting those rates and growth that we used to be able to, and kind of a recognition that we need to do things differently. Again, an interesting discussion that they had around growing value-added opportunities in Canada, and you've just got to think, that looks a lot different today than it did a week ago. But across the country, and we've kind of talked about this in the past, farm groups, general farm organizations, they all have a tough go. Farmers need to expect more from them, but they also need to support them and encourage them and participate in their processes, because that's how we get better outcomes.
Well, connecting the dots to what I'm going to present here at COYF this morning, that's one of the things that younger farmers have told us. And Tyler, we had done this research together. Younger farmers disenchanted.
Yeah, really, it was really kind of stark to see how that changes over ages. As you get older, you get more supportive of farm organizations, it seems, and it's kind of good to dive into that and understand that. But again, the young farmers that you're going to be talking to today are going to face a very different set of issues in their first 20 years of farming compared to somebody that's been farming for 20 years. And I don't think that we've got the right systems in place to make sure that they've got the support, the tools they need to manage those risks and seize the opportunities that are going to be in front of them.
Yeah. And Kelvin, you did a cool interview with a big fan of RealAgriculture, a huge fan. And he's farming, but maybe not like how we tend to define. It's a little bit different. It's a model toy farm. And he's like a world champion for this. Talk about it.
Robin Nickel, who lives in Vancouver in Ladner, British Columbia, who's originally from here in southern Manitoba. I ran into him by chance last year at a Christmas toy show. And he's, well, I shouldn't say by chance. That was the first in-person encounter with Robin. He's, like you said, been a listener to the show for a while and often sends us messages, feedback, and thoughts, jokes. I'm sure he'll be sending me something about being a Trudeau liberal or something based off of that.
This conversation.
I'm gonna get a T-shirt built.
It's a very misleading conversation.
Again, sorry, I just want to be clear. I don't think Kelvin's a Trudeau liberal, but that doesn't mean that he couldn't be a Christy Clark liberal.
Oh, okay. Anyway, carrying on.
Hey, I had numerous people come up to me afterwards, people that all of you know who are hardcore conservatives, who said, boy, I like her message. I would, she resonated with me. So that's a dangerous sort of situation for the Polyev conservatives. If that in Saskatchewan, that kind of reaction. Sorry, Kelvin, go ahead.
Okay.
Back to Robin Nicol and his model farm, though. He's now the first, not only the first Canadian, but the first back-to-back winner at the big national toy show in Dyersville, Iowa, that took place earlier this month. Last year, he won in the small scale, which is the 164, like the toys that we've all played with as kids on the floor, or our kids have played with. And this year, he won in the 132nd scale. So congratulations to Robin. And yes, we have an interview with him. You can see some cool shots of his farm, and it just extreme detail. He's an artist. And in the interview, we refer to him as the Wayne Gretzky of model farms. He is a true artist and pays so much attention to detail, the landscape, all that type of thing. So it's pretty cool. And in a week where we had a lot of serious news to talk about, it's also fun to talk about some stuff like that as well.
I just saw a tweet here. Canadian swaps market sees roughly 40% chance of a 50 basis point cut from the Bank of Canada in December. That's up from 31% before the GDP data. A 50-point cut. Imagine what that does to the Canadian dollar. We got some interesting currency exchange times ahead here indeed, which if you're exporting, great. Purchasing, not so much.
Not so good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? See, the problem is with bonus episodes, it's kind of infinite. And
it's not, because you have to go do a keynote.
I do. So. I'm going to run the 3 blocks, get on the stage, and we're going to talk about young farmers. And really appreciate Canada's outstanding young farmers for having us, giving me the opportunity to speak at the meeting. I was at the alumni reception on Wednesday night. I'll tell you, 3/4 of that audience are like regular listeners. Those are the people that I talk to. I met the original president of the organization, listens every day, Jack from Ontario. I talked to a farmer that's out in Fraser Valley who listens all the time. So really appreciate the RealAg audience and having those interactions and being able to talk about how much they enjoy the show and what they would like to see out of it going forward. It warms my heart, not to get too sappy on you, but it is pretty special to be able to do that. And also want to thank Helena Agri-Products and their product Resurge for making the interview with Christy Clark happen as well on a Wednesday show. Lyndsey, you want to say something?
No, I was just wiping a tear because you're a single tear. You're getting so sappy.
Well, it does. It's nice getting out and about and Shirley doing a lot of that. Next week on Tuesday, going to be at the Agrimart meeting in London, Ontario. Looking forward to that. Lyndsey's going to be at Grow Canada. I'm assuming Tyler's going to be there too. Aren't you?
Yes, I'll be around.
Okay, you'll be around.
He'll be around. He'll make an appearance and
I'll be in the vicinity.
Yeah. Hanging out in the lobby.
Working the hallways, talking about policy, drinking whiskey in the lounge, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, if anybody has any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And, I've been drinking out of my Chicago Bears mug here, my coffee mug. And let's just hope the Trudeau Liberals or the Polyev Conservatives, whoever has to renegotiate free trade with the U.S. between Canada and the U.S., let's just hope they manage it a lot better than Eberflus did yesterday at the end of the Bears game. That was a disaster. And to all of our listeners that were at the game, because I heard from several of you, yes, I understand. The Bears are terrible. Yes, it's good. Go. The Lions are much better. No shocker there. Indeed. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. This has been the bonus edition, and we'll talk to you again soon. Cheers, everybody.